A very good evening to all our viewers. Thank you for joining us tonight on the evening review. My name is Toivon Jabela. Tonight on the platform, we are joined by Professor Henning Melber. He is based in Sweden, and he follows closely the developments here at home, having come from Namibia himself. And we are here to weigh in on, among other things, the meeting that the EU ambassadors held with IPC leader Dr. Panduleni Itula last week, which has caused quite a consternation in some quarters. Thank you, Professor, for making time. I hope you can hear me. Give me your general perception of what transpired last week as far as that lunch is concerned.
Good evening, Toivo, and good evening to all those interested in our conversations. Thanks for having me. I think that meeting last week was a classical case of a storm in a teacup, which, however, put in the context of this year's elections coming up in November, signifies a threshold. It shows that what is usually considered as normal diplomacy is, in the context of Namibia this year, blown out of proportion. And last week, there were several contributing factors. The first one was the notable, prominent disclosure of the meeting by a posting on X, the former Twitter, by the German embassy on behalf of the German ambassador Thorsten Hutter, which stated, among others, I quote, "Honored to have the party president of the IPC for an exchange on current affairs in Namibia." Now, that is a little bit surprising because, as the EU then in a clarifying statement on Friday emphasized, it was just an ordinary working lunch. Why then put such prominence to an ordinary working lunch, which was basically exactly what the IPC made out of it through a statement by its spokesperson Ims Nashinge, but also through a posting by this informal party organ, which is on X, Twitter, that is the Windhoek Times, who blew it totally out of proportion, creating what seems to be a misleading evidence when one looks back at what the EU tried to clarify on Friday by indicating something like the EU is interested to talk to the next president of Namibia, something like that. And it is actually just a worrying indication that Namibia has seemed to enter into a degree of populist election campaigning which was never there before. There was always a degree of populism, not least by Swapo, but what we are witnessing now in Namibia is actually a blowing out of proportions of that, and we still have half a year to go until the elections. Election times in Namibia usually started August, September, with elections in late November. We seem to have already now entered the hot phase of elections in Namibia, and if one is not very carefully in self-disciplining in party politics, it might be a spiral which has reasons for concerns, because by sheer coincidence, we had this parallel event just 2 days before that meeting, when a disgruntled, frustrated resident of the Mix settlement at a Swapo rally slapped a functionary out of frustration. If that would have been kept quiet, it would have been a non-issue. But the NEEF felt this act of physical violence should be rewarded with 1,000 Namibia dollars, which for someone who is unemployed, frustrated, and battling with daily poverty is quite an incentive which might motivate repeated acts. It's the absolutely wrong signal at this moment in time. And what comes back to my mind when witnessing those events within only a few days is what the late President Hage Geingob usually said, that one should play the ball and not the person. We witness at the moment an opposite tendency, which I find rather worrying. And coming back to that meeting of the EU ambassadors with the IPC, one wonders, of course, if all those political parties in the opposition who are already represented in the National Assembly with a mandate have not a reason to feel snubbed. They haven't got such prominent recognition. So this is not a level playing field. And I think one needs to be very careful, not only when it comes to domestic political players, but also by the diplomatic interferences to show tact and show measurement. I'm not insinuating that it was a deliberate act of support by the EU member states to the IPC. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure that they really regret what has been happening since then. But there is a little degree of blame also to put on them that they were not more sensitive.
Yeah. So thank you for the elaborate answer, Professor. So do you think, because one of the arguments that have emerged is that what transpired as far as that lunch is concerned is that these are normal diplomatic engagements. They happen everywhere. I wrote in my editorial last week, for example, that if our ambassadors, the Namibian ambassadors abroad, are not engaging different stakeholders in the same manner, then they're not doing their work. Of course, the modus operandi can be different. Maybe there need to be more context and clarity to avoid confusion and creating a vacuum for conspiracy theories. But is it out of the ordinary for ambassadors to meet political actors in the country?
No, it's exactly what diplomats should do. And I totally agree with your pointer in last week's editorial on Friday. It's only, as I tried to explain at the beginning, that it was done in a way which gave reasons to be blown out of proportion. I called it a storm in a teacup, meaning that under usual circumstances, such a working lunch as the EU verified on Friday would have been also publicly displayed just like that, which would mean there would have been no reason at all for any of the EU member states and their diplomatic missions to announce that meeting with a photo and declare to be honored to have met the IPC president. That is the point. Keep the ball low, to return to that metaphor. Don't blow it out of proportions. The IPC did so. Okay, and you could say that's their party political populism. Like Venani did over the weekend. I followed in today's news articles in your paper and elsewhere in the media what kind of promises Venani did on behalf of PDM. And I was wondering, is he himself with own hands pumping the desalinated water from the sea into those regions? So, I mean, there are outrageous promises made, and that has a long history. That was one of the reasons why that frustrated resident of the mixed settlement slapped the Swapo functionary, which
yeah.
is the wrong reaction. But it's a response to these legions of promises made and no delivery. Coming back to the example and your question, I fail to understand why the EU gave that meeting such prominence. They should do their work quietly. They should meet with all of the party representatives, from Swapo to the one with the fewest seats in the National Assembly, to get an overall picture. That is indeed part of their job. But it's not part of their job to announce, almost like a celebration, that they felt honored by having a conversation with the IPC president.
Do you think, quickly before we go on a small break, Professor, that what we read in the papers on Friday, the Namibian quoted Dr. Kudumo from UNAM, who said that how the ruling party reacted. We saw Netumana Ndaitwah speaking at the Central Committee, alluding, insinuating that it amounts to election interfering and regime change agenda. And our international relations minister, as a matter of fact, very unprecedented, summoning these ambassadors. Do you think the reaction itself warranted what transpired?
It was a reaction out of proportion, and it just shows that Swapo is very thin-skinned given the circumstances, that the decline of its hegemony seems to continue. By all what we can expect, they will not add new votes, they might lose more votes, and the presidential campaign might get tighter between Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah and at least the IPC president as the most promising contender. So it just shows, on the behalf of Swapo, an overreaction. The foreign minister would have been well advised to informally consult with the EU and the EU member states to find out what is going on. Instead, he and Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah responded to the IPC statements. Now, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to suspect that the IPC blows it out of proportion. You do not have to fall for that. That's part of the pitfalls Namibia is entering the next few months when it comes to election campaigning. Don't take that for the truth. Go back, do your homework, like the EU diplomats should have done, consult them, and then after that consultation, take the final decision if there is more to comment in public or not. I think that would have been the more appropriate response.
Absolutely. We go for a very short break and then return with Professor Henning Melber.
Get real value for your money at Vurman Brock. Buy 2 kg Real Good chicken portions for $89.99. 2-liter Fanta assorted for just $17.99. 1-liter fruit tree juice for $18.99. 1 kg Reef 2-in-1 washing powder for $38.99 and 2-liter WB Deluxe Bubble Bath for $33.99. See all our specials online at www.vurmanbrock.com. We care.
Our conversation with Professor Melber continues. Now, Professor, you delved a little bit into what transpired at Mix. Also very unprecedented, not because we haven't seen violence before, but we have never seen it being directed at the ruling party by an ordinary member of society for reasons that he advanced, that they felt that they're being sold dreams, their life remains stuck in their misery, and that happened. Is this the signs of the times?
I think it's an indication of the lack of delivery, meaning the lack of good governance, which accumulated frustration in 34 years since independence. Namibia remains, together with South Africa, the most unequal country in the world. If you look at the data, close to half of Namibia's population live in poverty. It's a higher middle income country. Statistics are very misleading. These statistics suggest that looking at the gross domestic product, if you distribute it on each of the inhabitants, Namibians have a per capita income over the year of close to 10,000 US dollars. It's a tiny fraction of Namibians who have such an income. And it's 5% or so of the Namibian population which have multiple times that income. Namibia made some headlines this year that it has the highest growth of millionaires on the continent. One of the financial international journals introduced Namibia as the next paradise for rich people. That's actually a very tragic story if you try to look at it from the point of view of the destitute. So Namibia is indeed facing a time bomb ticking. Unemployment has been grown, while economic recovery has made modest improvements. The unemployment is still higher as it was before COVID. We still have more people confronted with hunger, being dependent on food aid. Namibia is in the unfortunate situation to face another drought with devastating consequences. And then having political parties, not least the one that is responsible for governance since independence, making huge promises as if this is about to be paradise on earth, reinforces the despair and the frustration of those at the receiving end, which then is a reminder you can't eat democracy.
Absolutely.
The advantage of democracy is you can articulate your complaints. You can't eat authoritarianism either, but in democracy, at least you can share your frustration. And Namibia's multi-party democracy offers the space to share the frustration. But you need to handle it with responsibility. It does not mean that you are entitled to physical violence to articulate your frustration. Neither when you are in power nor if you are not in power. It's too precious and too treasure what Namibia has achieved since independence. We haven't had a single known political murder in 34 years. If you look around in the region and elsewhere, this is a massive achievement. And we must care for it. We must treasure it, and we need to protect it. If there are irresponsible political elements in society who begin to publicly reward physical violence, then this is a very dangerous avenue to follow.
Yeah. Related to what transpired in Mix is another incident that happened, I think, in Oshakati, where a member of the IPC, of course, he was suspended by the party for that, but he apparently said that they are ready to do what Swapo did in the struggle, essentially saying that they are also ready to take up arms against the ruling party. And the party, his party, IPC, of course, denounced that, and they suspended him. Again, a very worrying development there, Professor.
It's really worrying. It underlines what I articulated. I very much welcome the immediate response by the IPC. That's the way to handle it. No nonsense reactions saying that is not on. That's the absolute right way to do. The question is, how do you take to task parties who act in such an irresponsible way? That's a different story. If party internally you deal with these voices, that's how it should be. But if we go back to the other example, that is something where a party took that stance and defended it in public. And that deserves outright rejection from civil society and all other parties. Let's not turn it into a matter of controversy between Swapo and the one other party. This is a matter for Namibian democracy and for all social forces in Namibia who care about democracy, relative peace, and relative stability. Namibia faces a lot of so-called structural violence. Poverty is one of those. Inequality is one of those. Marginalization of people. The different rooms in the so-called Namibian house, where some have a nice balcony sitting in the sun, and others, if at all, are accommodated in a basement and have to do the washing and the ironing and the cooking of food and the dishwashing. That is structural violence. But it's a different way to handle it. You handle it by the power of your vote in elections. And if those who lack sufficient performance are punished for the lack of delivery, that's the right answer in elections. But you don't start slapping people or threatening we do it in the liberation way or whichever way which has violent connotations.
Absolutely. Perhaps in the interest of time, Professor, I just want you to engage me quickly on another issue related to the IPC, and that is what also appeared in the papers last week. The party has dominated headlines last week, and one of the reasons was that the party has acquired a new fleet of vehicles, and the transactions seem to have followed very questionable routes, and the party is not really forthcoming to contextualize why. For example, we are told that some money came from IUM, the university, and went through what looks like a conduit entity that then went to buy the cars. And for a party that doesn't have really a known stream of income, it brought a lot of questions to the credibility of the party that portrays itself as a transparent entity.
Yes, and there are several factors to that. The first one is, you might recall that a few weeks back, the IPC announced that they will display full transparency and be accountable once the mourning period over the death of the late President Hage Geingob is over. That was an official announcement.
Yes.
So the IPC created expectations, legitimate expectations, that they will provide all the necessary details to satisfy the curiosity. And last week they backtracked from that announcement. And in parallel, we were confronted with a plethora of different speculations, rumors, suspicions. The reason that Itula gave, that disclosing individual sponsors might create disadvantages for them, is not too far-fetched. He refers to previous examples, and I do remember these examples. It's not that Namibia has a climate where you can be totally accountable without any risks for those who are willing to take political sides which are not met with positive judgment by those who are in political control. But that came far too late. And at the same time, as we know, it will not prevent Namibians to deal with all the rumors, with all the speculations, forcing people to come out to just justify themselves as it happens right now while we are speaking, to explain what is meant. So it doesn't help at the end. At the end of the day, I think the only way forward is to really offer full disclosure. And it means that those who are willing to take political sides, which are not favored by those in power, have to take that risk. The other interesting thing is, of course, hypothetically, what if, and it's not a prognosis, it's just a hypothesis. What if IPC has, as of March 2025, sufficient influence and power as a party to dish out rewards? Wouldn't it be important to know who gets the rewards for which reasons? That has to do with democracy, transparency, and accountability too.
Yes, absolutely. Professor, that's the time that we had for today. It's always a pleasure engaging you, and today is no different. Thank you very much for coming on.
It's a privilege and an honor in this case, and a pleasure to see you again and listen to you, Toivo. And I wish you all the best for your continued independent, autonomous mind and journalism.
Wonderful. Thank you, Professor. That is Professor Henning Melber speaking to us from Sweden. He follows Namibian developments, and he was really just sharing his thoughts on a plethora of things that have happened in the past week. Thank you for watching.